there was some research presented here, and I jotted down some questions last week that relate to the survey and the findings, and I'll ask a couple questions I think on those findings, and then I'll do a couple other questions that are a little more provocative or more kind of critical, because I think I don't want this to be a conversation that sort of is a self-congratulatory conversation about, well, this is a sector naturally that prepares people for careers. That's great, but you guys all know that, and I'm hoping a few of the questions we can probe into some of the areas in this sector maybe where there is room for improvement. Certainly, God knows there's room for improvement at Wesleyan University in preparing students for careers, obviously. But it'll be interesting to turn a little bit of the critical focus in on this sector and see if there's some areas for improvement in career preparation right here. To start with, well, here. There are clearly colleges out there that do a very good job of consulting job data and the local captains of industry in shaping programs that will yield graduates who can enter the local job market. There's a new university, a public university, or I should say it might be private, not-for-profit, in Pennsylvania that just opened in the last several years, and it was from the get-go a project of collaboration among the people at the university, the local employers, and the sort of city leaders. And it's interesting to see more and more schools seem to pop up in the nonprofit sector that are trying to sort of seed graduates into careers. So, generally speaking, how good a job are colleges doing in this area overall, again, of shaping programs that will yield graduates for the local job market? And are some sectors in higher ed doing better than others at doing this?
Sure. I'm Andy Kaplan, representing the Coalition for Educational Success, which advocates for greater access to higher education for non-traditional learners, as well as representing the interests of career colleges in the public policy debate. I'm also a partner in Quad Partners, which has been an investor only in education, exclusive an investor in education for well over a decade, and most of us have spent our careers in education before that. And from that perspective, I share some of your, and my partners share some of your inherent background issues when you come to the problem of not really having had direct experiences ourselves, and really even within many of the people we know. But the more time you spend with the schools, the more time you realize that for them to be successful, the career colleges to be successful, they have to produce graduates that get good jobs. Many of their students are through referrals. And their viability in the community is based on their ability to have success with their students, and the students define success as getting that job. So they're very focused on this, and schools that do it well start with the employers, as you said, and backward integrate that into a curriculum where the employers will say, if you produce graduates with these skills and abilities, then the employers will hire them, and then ideally goes back and finds the right students who can be successful with those programs. I also think externships are a really key component in many of the programs, which is, I think, a little bit of a difference between the way some of the career schools focus on it versus some of the more traditional schools, because that gives the students direct experience working on real-life jobs, working with real-life collaborations with people in those industries, gives them a sense of what it's going to really be like to work there, and of course the employers get a chance to see the students in action and ideally hire them. So it's very much integrated, and again, another key success factor is the ability for those schools to continue to modify and use that loop over time to continue to improve their programs. So I think for the most part, career colleges have to do it to be successful and have to do it to be viable.
If I may, I'm Dominic Chandomenico. I'm with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And first, let me thank ACICS for putting on this forum and having me be a part of it. But coincidentally, this morning I actually had a meeting with a research firm called Burning Glass that actually mines job descriptions posted on online websites and matches them against various points of information, such as what college degrees are offered. And they break it down, and it's really phenomenal what kind of data that they have. But I actually asked them this question this morning, how much do they deal with colleges and universities in trying to feed this information back to them so that they can finely tune their programs and what kind of things that they're offering. And not surprisingly, they talk with the for-profit sector all the time. They have a lot of them as their clients. And they talk to them not just on the front end for how they're developing their programs as they go along, but they really pay attention to job placement on the back end as well. So if they're having some issues where they're not able to place as many students in a particular field, they'll go back to them for some of the data to help fine-tune and diagnose what the problems are so that they can make adjustments. And as you might expect, as you go further away from what traditional education is or is thought to be in this country, the more in tune with this kind of data and information that you find. So the for-profits use it a lot. The community colleges, a little bit less so. You get to the continuing education at the 4 years. Those departments will rely on it a little bit and almost not at all with traditional institutions.
I'm just going to say, I wonder if part of that is because the four-year institutions see themselves more as national organizations, and as you're saying about these career colleges, they're very close with the community, as are the community colleges. But I think, we have seen community colleges picking up on this idea of partnering with industry and thinking about, where the future is, where the jobs are in their area. And I just want to point out, maybe you can express for the career colleges as well, I don't know that as well, but that there's some reservation at community colleges on tying their programs really closely to the jobs of today, right? Because we want to make sure that students are prepared for the jobs of tomorrow as well. So I'd just be interested if you guys had anything to say at the career colleges on that.
Well, hi, my name is Ned Levine. I'm the president of Newmont University. We're in South Jordan, Utah. And my perspective on sector versus degree of focus on outcomes is that it all comes back to your definition of success. And if you define success amorphously and about student happiness, that is one way of effectively defining success. And I don't know about your alma mater, but I know about mine. And I know about what we do at Newmont University, which is we want to be measured very specifically about how successful we are at launching graduates into cool careers that are of high value to employers and longevity to those graduates. And so our success definition defines everything we do, and that's why we must be connected with employers and let employers have deep voice in how our program works and what comes out.
Did you want to have a say?
Just one quick thing. Paul Gore, University of Utah, Salt Lake City, and introduced as a former board member for the National Resource Center, first-year college. As somebody who's worked extensively in traditional public four-year institutions for many years, I can say that we see pockets of success in those traditional four-year public institutions, primarily in the professional training programs. And I think that has a lot to do with the relationship that those programs establish with the community that they're trying to serve, the employers that they're trying to serve. So business, engineering, some of the IT.
Well, I should note that Northeastern University, which is known throughout the land for, I think they don't use the word externships, but it's something like that, got the most applications of any school in its sector last year, and that says something. So clearly the traditional colleges and universities are, I guess, learning how to do that. Okay, let me hit a more, I guess, critical question, because this occurred to me. On that survey, you see the employers torn or maybe ambiguous in their responses. On the one hand, they're talking about specific skills. On the other hand, they're talking about this thirst for applicants with a broad-based education. Now, I certainly got a broad-based education at Wesleyan, and I imagine, although again, I have fairly shallow knowledge, but that in the career college sector, you're less likely to get sort of what someone would call sort of a University of Chicago-style core curriculum. You're not going to probably get that. So here, a majority of respondents in that survey that we were looking at said they think most students would be better served by a broad-based education than by preparation for a specific career. And that maybe these people are thinking of their own families, their own kids when they're talking about this. They might send their kid to Duke for all I know. I'm not sure. But anyway, career colleges clearly seem to emphasize the latter over the former, specific career preparation over broad-based education, while community colleges sort of let you do what you want. So what could those sectors, community colleges, career colleges, do to provide their students a more diverse knowledge base? than they do now.
Everything's relative, right, Daniel? And it's critical, I think, to remember that accredited institutions have defined sets of ratios between skills-based education components and general education components, which would be, I think, in the broad-based category. We grant bachelor's and master's degrees only. Our bachelor's program is 180 credits, and 58 of those credits are specifically not skills-based. We need to be measured by the standards of our accreditor, but in addition, we need to be measured, as I said before, by the expectations of prospective employers. And time again, those employers tell us that what they want is a graduate who can communicate, a graduate who can work in a team, a graduate who is sympathetic to the feelings, needs, and perspectives of others, and someone who can participate in critical thinking. If those are not broad-based skills, then I don't understand the meaning of the term.
I think the problem with that is that the broad-based infrastructure skills or scaffolding skills, what the report's referring to as professional hygiene skills, are not being explicitly communicated to students, that they're not being taught as part of a formal pedagogy. They might be delivered informally, but they're not kind of raising to that level of
Can you
explicitness.
define, what the heck is professional hygiene?
Yeah, well,
that
professional-
came up loud and clear on the survey.
Yeah.
What is it?
You'll know it when you don't
go
see
it, right? Yeah, good. You know, I think what the report's referring to are is clustering into the professional hygiene skills, or skills that have been around for a long time. For those of you who were here in the 90s, you may remember the SCANS report, the Secretary's Commission on the Advancement of Necessary Skills. That was a report that came out, I think, by the Department of Labor, and articulated a number of very specific content skills, but also articulated this set of infrastructures, non-cognitive, soft skills, I think they were referred to as earlier in this presentation. So they've been around for quite some time. Employers have been saying that they're negligent, that the students are arriving inadequately prepared with those skills for some time now. And I think now it's just beginning to reach to the point of the institutions, the educational institutions, are saying, how do we communicate these skills? I just quickly came back from the United Arab Emirates, where they, as a country, are beginning to align their curricula vertically so that these skills are infused and made explicit from year one of post-secondary education through the fourth year and beyond.
But I mean, if I may, I think a lot of the professional hygiene deficiencies that we have stem from a general lack of job experience before getting their first professional job. I think we've de-emphasized, and this is cumulative over the years, so it's gone a little bit in a cycle where we had the dip. We're starting to get more internship and work-based learning opportunities for students, but we've reached a point where students, all throughout their careers, whether in high school or in college, they're expected to focus on their studies, and that's noble and all that, but they're not because they're not doing the internships, because they're not having jobs, they're arriving without that kind of experience. The things that you would learn from seeing your peers on the job, the things you would learn by having a boss take you under their wing and say, look, this is how you should do things, this is what you should be doing, you should show up on time, you should do this, and you should work in teams, and of course teamwork is kind of one of those things that students in college shy away from whenever they hear the words group project, and probably for good reason, based on my own experiences on what group projects really meant. But I think what we need to do, I think that having colleges directly teach that is something of a low bar, I think, in terms of what we would expect from education. But I do think that having more of those direct work-based experiences can help a long way towards that.
I mean, I think you're right. I think that having workplace experience really helps students to build those skills, and I think it's an interesting thing to think about, given that youth unemployment is so much higher than are already extremely high unemployment rates. So we're going to have to think about getting students those experiences through education rather than just hoping that they get a summer job and learn how to show up and dress right.
And that's going to get worse as we go through, because if you look at the unemployment rates now, they're highest at that 25 to 34-year-old
Right.
age. That's
Right.
when they're building up their leadership experience. That's when they're building up the kinds of things that you would expect that once they go to the 36 to or 35 to 44, they're going to moving up into mid-level management kinds of positions. They're not going to be able to take on those positions, and we're going to need them to as
Right.
baby boomers retire.
But I do agree with Paul that it's kind of interesting to look at the things that employers cited in these surveys and think about how those are some of the things that we assess the least in college. And I don't think you have to set up a professional hygiene course in college. I think that would be really difficult to do. But four-year institutions are thinking more now about how do we assess the things that Congresswoman Fox mentioned, academically adrift. So the things that academically adrift looked at. Problem solving, critical thinking skills. How do we ensure that students aren't leaving our schools without those skills? We should be looking at some of these skills as well.
Yeah, I'd have to say there's such great diversity amongst the career colleges and amongst the programs that they offer. I mean, everything, we have interest in over 80 schools, and so we offer everything from cosmetology, which is tremendously hands-on and hugely apprenticeship-based, all the way up through master's degrees in acupuncture or bachelors of nursing, which are really a combination of the kinds of skills that we're talking about, both critical thinking and really hands-on kinds of stuff. And as Ned said, many times, both the states and the accreditors have a lot to say in the balance of the programs and whether they have occupational degrees or they don't have. You have academically focused degrees in their states. So it's a huge range, and I think to kind of paint it as one scenario, I think is difficult. And a very difficult conversation to have, I think, is that there is many different types of post-secondary education. Different types are appropriate for different kinds of students and different kinds of goals and different kinds of outcomes. I would say I would cut that a different way by saying, demographics and history and family relationships, I think, have an awful lot to do with how long a road you've got to train students in these professional hygiene topics. In our more professional higher-end programs, they have the same expectations perhaps as you might have had at Wesleyan or I had at my school. But some of the more entry-level programs, it's the first post-secondary education of any kind that might have occurred in that family, maybe the first high school graduate in that family. They have no role models whatsoever for what it takes to be successful in the workplace, and therefore those schools have to teach them from day one basic stuff. Resumes, how to do interviews, how to dress, provide clothing for those students in many cases to do it. So it's just a gigantic range. And I think, as you said, I think it really depends on how the schools define success as to how they have to approach those kinds of topics.
If I could do a redirect, I'm fascinated by this professional hygiene thing. If it's, I suppose that like business schools, it's pretty common, I think, that you'll end up knowing how to comport yourself in a business once you finish business school. The most ambitious and successful journalists at the Washington Post all did internships at newspapers while they were in college, whether someone told them to or didn't. I didn't, but most of my more successful colleagues did. So I just honestly don't know. In the career college sector, is it the norm that a student, by the time that student finishes the career credential, has that person actually been in an office doing something like an internship, an externship, an apprenticeship? Is that common? I would imagine maybe it's not 100% common, because I know these programs pride themselves on being quick and efficient. So does that happen?
Well, often there is some form of practicum experience. As Andy says, it could be an internship, externship. We don't believe in those things. We have a different model, but we also do have a very deep practicum experience. The issue is that as a student who cannot get a job in a fast food restaurant because those jobs are adult jobs these days, enters any post-secondary education, they come without that professional experience. And it then becomes our job to provide that and prepare them. And why do we have to do that? We have to do that because the employer expects it of us. They demand it. And our employers, those who come to Newmont to hire our students, compete for our graduates. They're in high demand. And the reason they are in high demand is that we found ways of taking high school students from all across America with different orientations and different preparations and turning them into young professionals. And we do take that responsibility, because if we don't, we cannot fulfill our promise, which is that they'll get an education that leads to the launch of a career, because they'll be rejected by the employer. So we can't neglect to do it, even though we don't want to. And as you say, it's not the most fun part of my job or my colleagues' jobs, but it's a requisite.
Can I just say, I just have to say, I feel like we can't overestimate how well students at elite colleges even are prepared in these ways. You know, I keep thinking, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, I was a student at Boston College Law School, and it's on the same campus as the freshman campus. So it's just law students and freshmen. And there was one student who would come every day to lunch in his bathrobe and slippers. And one of my friends, who's a law student, would get so upset about it. And it was like, this student doesn't know that that just shouldn't be done. You know, that's not the way to comport yourself at a four-year elite school. And I have friends who are hiring managers at large consulting companies in the DC area where, you know, the employees are expected to dress in business dress every day. And they're having conversations with new hires about, you know, the length of a woman's skirt, right? Like what it means to wear nylons and these things to work. I mean, I hate to pick on the women there. I'm sure the men have similar problems, but and you know, even law schools are putting out for their students before they do their interviews how to dress for an interview, what kind of personal hygiene you need for a job interview. So I think that elite schools and even professional schools are dealing with these issues as well, but they don't have the open conversations that you're having at the career colleges. They're putting on voluntary programs and hoping that students show up, and they don't feel comfortable talking about these things in the way that you're talking about them.
I'd like to challenge the notion that these can only be delivered through externships or practical work placements. I think these professional hygiene skills can be developed through overt, explicit classroom discussions and reflection.
Yeah, you know, there's a couple of ways. It's not only the externships and the clinicals, but in many schools it's the faculty. And you know, if you have actual practitioner faculty that comes out of the workplace, especially if they're adjunct and they're not teaching full time, or if they've recently come from the workplace, or they spend a lot of time researching the workplace, they can really bring that to the students. And you know, almost every day it's going to be, you know, here's the theory, and by the way, in the real world, here's the way it really works, and here's things you need to know about it, and here's the kinds of problems you have to solve. I think that's just crucial. And you know, on a more related topic to what you have, you know, we certainly have that kind of stuff at the higher level, but you know, at almost every level, we have to tell students that, you know, what you post on Facebook is going to come back to haunt you. You know, you can't use an email like Hot Mama 97, you know, when you're on your resumes if you expect to get a job. And stuff, you know, your voicemail has to be appropriate. You know, it's stuff that they just would never think of. It's everything from basic to very sophisticated problem solving and leadership skills. And I do think it can be taught explicitly.
I wanted to mention the law program at Washington and Lee set up a new third year, and the new third year program is much more professionally oriented. And I remember that something like half the faculty who come in there and teach are current practicing attorneys, and so a lot of what's embedded into those courses is this is how we do it at our firm. When we go and present a document in court, this is what we do, this is the routine, you know. And so by the end of the third year, the law student knows a lot more about how to actually function as a lawyer, and that's exactly the point of the third-year program, which is interesting.
And it goes beyond that, too. It's the expectations of the professors in these courses. It's, you know, being flexible, but also treating the students as if they were your employees to some degree. It's about expectations for implicit and both implicit and explicit. And, you know, just to clarify, I didn't say that it can't be taught. I just said that there are other ways rather than having a specific course on it that they're just not getting. And I think that that's part of the issue.
And if the schools want a reason to care about these skills, not only in their product, the students as they leave the institution, but among the students as they're arriving in the institution, these same characteristics are predictive of student success and persistence, as they are workplace success and performance.
Right. But you know, turning it back to the accreditation side and the goals and how people define their success, you know, there's accreditors like ACICS that focus on outcomes. They focus on graduation rate. They focus on placement rate. They focus on in-field placement rate. There are other accreditors who are more focused on the inputs and the qualifications of the faculty and the kinds of syllabi that are put together and the number of volumes in the library and research facilities that are available. They're inherently different goals that are set for these institutions, and I think that's part of the conversation. I think the conversation's got to be, what kind of return on investment, if you will, do we want for all of our students across all the sectors, not just career schools, but community colleges, other not-for-profits at all levels. I think it's a difficult conversation because we've kind of let it organically happen over the years, but I think it's time for a more focused conversation.
How are we on time, by the way? One more question. Okay, well, here's one. And this is just something that made me curious when I was reading the report. The respondents to this survey, when they were asked to rate specific skills that they seek, I think the two highest were interpersonal skills and teamwork. And those are obviously related. When I hear those terms, it makes me think of the visit I paid to UMVC the other week, and I saw a chemistry class where the students are all sitting at tables in groups of 4, the same way that they sort of group students together in my daughter's 4th grade class. And they were doing the project together and working on their interpersonal skills and their teamwork. Well, here's what I'm thinking. In this sector, career colleges, correct me if I'm wrong, there's an increasing amount of pedagogy that's delivered online, isn't that right? And that means to a student with a laptop in their room, in some cases, certainly isolated from other students. And I'm wondering, with more and more coursework at UNC, UVA, USC, and in career colleges and community colleges, with more of it being done online, a large share of it being done online, how do you teach interpersonal skills and teamwork? How do you get those skills across?
No one says that you do. It's very possible that there are skills and knowledge that are not teachable online. While online is a great medium for many things, in my institution, we don't actually believe that online education is appropriate for 18 or 19-year-olds at all. Because without the exposure to other humans and without solving problems together, we don't believe that they mature in that way. So we don't actually do that, but we do place a huge amount of emphasis on teamwork, and in fact, it's a stated part of our pedagogy that they must complete 3/4 of team-based learning, and that is our way of exposing students to the world that they'll experience as professionals.
My response to that would be that a lot of companies that either have employees spread out across the nation or around the world. I don't see much of a difference between how their online education works and how they would work in a team in that setting as compared to how they would work virtually with their colleagues around the nation or around the world in that as well. They'll either use video conferencing, they'll use online chats, they'll use emails. I don't see the online part as being very disconnected, in online education as being very disconnected from what many people in more high tech, or whether it's high tech or office based, maybe when you get more towards personal services, it's not going to be quite as great of an analog. But I think for a lot of professions, you can impart that.
I just have a couple of thoughts on that question. One is that when online education is used correctly, it can foster some of these skills in a way that in-person courses can't. Face-to-face education can't. So, labs give a lot of interpersonal connection, but in lecture courses, we struggle with getting students to work together. And so, I taught a course where we experimented with using wikis as a way to get students to working together on an assignment, editing something together. That's something that you can do online. My other thought on this is, if I could just channel Anya Kamnetz for a minute. I don't know if she would like me doing that, but she's the author of DIYU, and her response would be, well, we've always bundled these things together as part of the bachelor's degree, that you get these interpersonal skills and teamwork there, but you can get them in other ways. One could get the same kind of probably teamwork and interpersonal skills through like Habitat for Humanity. I think that the question for colleges is, if you're holding out a bachelor's degree and an associate's degree as something that comes with those skills, it's how do you ensure that students are getting them elsewhere, and then accrediting or credentialing that knowledge in some way.
And I think it gets back to how your institution defines success, like you said earlier. If success is imparting the skills someone needs to be successful in a career, then you're going to find a way to do exactly what you're talking about. If your definition of success is how am I going to look on U.S. News and World Report, or how prestigious is my university, or some of these other non-outcomes-based factors, you might leave that by the wayside because who cares?
Yeah, look, there's an incredible, again, diversity of programs and people. You know, if you're far from other people who share your interests, and there's not a school that's nearby that will help you, and you know, there's a terrific program available, I don't think that, I think there's tremendous and really exciting stuff that's happening with online tools, both even as an accessory to an in-person experience or as a hybrid program or as a completely online program. So I think it's highly specific to the program, to the way you define success, and to the creativity and the drive of the faculty and the institution to generate great outcomes.
Are we done? Well, oh yes, questions. Thank you all of you for those great answers. And questions, any questions? You better come up with some or I'm going to ask more. So. Well, I was kind of curious to ask, you know, the Congresswoman I think was mentioning that there's this national conversation going on right now about effectiveness and efficiency in higher education. You know, the president met this morning with a group of college presidents, and I saw a note come across the wire from the private sector colleges group saying, hey, they were upset that nobody from that sector had been invited to attend this meeting at the White House. So I'm kind of curious, what does the career college sector do to get back in this conversation about sort of setting higher education policy? Because it seems like, I think there's a feeling from the sector that it's being sort of excluded, shut out of some of the sort of progressive conversations going on.
Yeah, speaking from the coalition standpoint, I think that's exactly right, and it's a constant fight to be included in that dialogue. You know, having said that, the coalition is engaged with the White House and is trying to find ways to close the skills gap that's out there, for, you know, that's impacting the hiring and impacting the economy, and really trying to improve things for everybody. And there are conversations going on to help, but it is always a struggle. I think that people have decided that tax status is a crucial factor in deciding educational outcomes, and I don't really know why that is, other than, you know, historical bias. And it's a constant fight, but I think you're right. It should be one dialogue with all the institutions, since all of us do define success differently, and there's a variety of viewpoints. I think you want to take them all into account. I also think, you know, people focus very much on tuition costs, but it's not really the cost. The cost is the societal cost that you've got to focus on. There's taxpayer subsidization, there's tuitions, there's institutional grants, there's scholarships, there's any manner of funding sources. And so I think you've got to look on a societal basis of the ROI across all those factors, and there's different outcomes that are appropriate for different industry sectors and different kinds of students in different kinds of contexts. And it's been a battle to be included. I think there's sort of a pendulum swing in Washington when everyone is ready to treat all institutions equally, and then it kind of swings the other way where every institution's got its own little category and its own little advocates. And I think we're somewhere between those pendulum swings right now. And I think there's great hope, given the import of improving our economy and improving the job situation. I think there's great hope that that dialogue will continue and be more inclusive.
And I should hasten to add, by the way, that I work for a company that owns Kaplan, and so every time I write about it, I say that, and so I figure now that I'm talking about it, I should say that here as well. Any other thoughts on that point, or any questions? Question?
So the research pointed to a gap between what employees need and what they currently have. What recommendations would the panel make, or have some thoughts on what can we do specifically across the board to shrink that gap, which seems to be widening?
It's a good question.
You know, as I've said, I think there needs to be much better dialogue between employers and institutions of all kinds. And I think, you know, again, it's some institutions do not think of themselves as being interested in closing the job gap. They're interested in training the leaders of the future with broad skills to solve problems and to step up to the next level. And yet there's a big job gap today. And I think, you know, perhaps it's a transitional dialogue and perhaps it's more of a permanent dialogue, but focusing on outcomes rather than inputs and focusing on solving those job openings, I think is a crucial way to do it. And, you know, unfortunately, the public sector is really in a difficult position now because of the recession. You know, there's much less investment available for them to be able to retool and reintroduce programs. one benefit of the career college sector is that they do reinvest, and we do try to constantly move to where the new programs are and can make the investments in infrastructure necessary to change. So I think if there's a way to unlock that investment potential, I think all institutions could do a better job of focusing on and moving to where the job is, skating where the puck's going to be, as Gretzky used to say. So.
It's interesting that a lot of the accountability discussions right now are focusing on these metrics like time to graduation, retention, things that are easy to measure. But as a faculty member at an institution, I'm constantly challenged to articulate what the goals and objectives, what the learning outcomes of my course are. And those have historically been content focused. If you're teaching mathematics, the learning outcomes that you're expected to demonstrate are mathematics performance. And what we're seeing in this survey is that employers are looking more broadly. They're looking for these professional hygiene skills. And I would like to see more faculty held accountable for building outcomes related to those professional hygiene skills into their course evaluations and their demonstrated learning outcomes.
I mean, I think, honestly, fundamentally, we need to approach the disconnect between how institutions view themselves as being in pursuit of fundamental knowledge and awareness and building out well-rounded people that this really is a huge disparity for why people go to colleges and universities, which is to gain skills and to get a degree which is going to help them out in life and ultimately get them a job. And I think that the two goals aren't really lining up, and I think that that's the first gap that needs to be closed, where the institutions need to see themselves as serving a public interest rather than this noble pursuit. And there's nothing wrong with the noble pursuit, but it shouldn't be the primary focus.
It's not for everybody.
Not for everyone.
No questions?
What do you guys see as the impact of gainful employment on the school's abilities to produce graduates in the next 10, 20 years?
Conceptually, I think there's some merit to the idea that students' tuition burden should correlate to the job outcomes they have. Having said that, I think the implementation that's been proposed and that it's been implemented or supposed to be implemented is highly ineffective at actually achieving that particular outcome due to a variety of implementation issues. I also don't understand why it only applies to the career schools versus all schools. That's just never made any sense to me. If there's a conversation about ROI, it should apply to everybody. If there's a conversation about debt and costs, it should apply to everybody. And I would also include in that conversation the taxpayer subsidies. Every school at some level makes a profit of some kind. It's just kind of how they spend it that matters. The career schools invest in new programs and pay taxes and create jobs. And not-for-profits have other goals in addition to those things. They might have sports teams and student amenities and high-end research. I mean, not all of those things are necessarily superficial. Some of them are quite deep and important. But I think gainful employment kind of interferes with the process for doing this for students properly. And a lot of the issue is, I think the career colleges see themselves as training people for a career, a long career, a lifelong career. It's the first step in a long ladder of self-improvement and improvement for their families and the people who rely upon them. And the way it's implemented really does not allow you to focus on that. And I think it's going to have a lot of unintended consequences the way it's done.
I believe that every college is a career college, and that gainful outcomes are a responsibility of every educator. And there is no reason that any sector or any tax status should make an educator immune from that expectation. And so the principle of gainful is sound. The execution, as Andy says, is complex. And until we open the dialogue and until every educator is measured by the standards that mom and dad would like to see, which is, I go to college and something good happens that can be measured, and usually it can be measured in currency, then we're going to have a problem. We're going to have a problem, and that will be only divisive for the education system in America, which is comprehensive and should not be
And I think
factionalized.
And I think ultimately it's going to have a detrimental impact on the people who need the education most, the non-traditional students, the students that don't come from families that have a history of going to college, people that are looking to improve themselves and to take the next step in their lives. Those are the types of students that the for-profits service on a higher frequency rate than the traditional education system. And I think, when you set up those kinds of barriers for people that are trying to get these degrees, I think you're hurting the people more than you are anyone else.
Just to follow up, and that's, I'm sorry, a little more detail, I think in implementation, it's highly discriminatory to those who have poor credit due to societal, family, demographic, and influences that have nothing to do with the quality of the school, and because they may have issues that make it difficult for them to pay their loans back, or may need them to go to some kind of income-based repayment plan, which is not really properly counted under the current implementation. And it's also discriminatory toward other people from a poorer demographic, because they'll have to borrow to support their living expenses at the same time. That's also not properly calculated. And lastly, I think it's discriminatory toward anybody in a family who might have childcare responsibilities or other support responsibilities in the family, which tends to be women, doesn't have to be, because of the way the measurements are structured. If they take time off, especially nearly after they complete school, to attend to those things, the schools get punished for serving those populations. And again, I think there's a ton of unintended consequences built into this.
I would just say, I wouldn't speak to whether the rule was the right rule or the wrong rule. There's, I think, good arguments on any side that there were good things and bad things about the rule, but you guys are like the original innovators of higher education, So my thought about the future for graduates is that for-profit colleges, as the flexible organizations, which you guys have stressed in this panel, will be able to think of new ways to serve that population of students who you're committed to serving. And so, I look forward to seeing what you come up with. I'm glad I don't have to do it.